Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Yom HaAtzmaut Tiyul 2020, the 72nd anniversary of Israel. I'm happy to be your guide today on this exciting visit to some of the places that played an instrumental role in the pathway, the March to Independence back in April and May 1948. So we're going to begin our trip today with a visit to a place called the Machon Ayalon in Rehovot. Fascinating place because the War of Independence could not have been possible without what would happen here at Machon Ayalon, the Ayalon Institute, outside Rehovot on what's known as Kibbutz Hill. Because way back in the 1930s, already the leadership of the Yishuv understood very well that if we're going to have a state, if our dreams for ultimate fulfillment of the Zionism that was set in motion back in the late 19th century with Theodor Herzl for Zionist Congress, if that was to be a reality, we were going to probably have to fight for it as much as nobody wanted to have to fight for it. In order to do that, we had to be prepared. So already in 1938, the Hagana had representatives combing Europe looking for the equipment necessary to produce bullets for the war that nobody wanted, obviously, but everybody believed would be inevitable. That desire to avoid war, of course, was even more acute after the end of the Holocaust, but we'll come to that in context. So here we are now at the decision to build a munitions factory under a kibbutz on the surface in Machon Ayalon, or Kibbutz Hill outside of the city of Rehovot. And on the surface, it was designed to look like a real kibbutz. And the reason why is because the British were only 200 yards away. There was a British plant, a British army base just nearby. And one of the people in the initial group that came here said, this is ludicrous. How could we be doing the manufacture of weapons and the manufacture of bullets literally right under the eyes of the British who were just a few hundred yards away? Shlomo Hillel, who led the group, eventually went on to become a speaker of the Knesset. Today, even 72 years later, is alive and well in a kibbutz called Magan Michael, not far from Haifa. Shlomo Hillel responded, son, talking to this young fellow, to do something clandestine in the underground, you have to do it under the eyes of the enemy, and then you have your best chance of being able to keep it a secret. And so the decision was made to set up a secret munitions plant here on Kibbutz Hill, which was a kibbutz training ground. And one of the key buildings in this operation was the building we're looking at, which is a laundry. Why was the laundry so critically important? Well, for a number of reasons. First of all, it's a kibbutz. And if you really want to maintain the impression of it being a real kibbutz, you need a laundry. Kibbutz members go out to the fields, they get dirty every day. And so to help build this idea of avoiding suspicion, so the Hagana built a laundry, and indeed they're doing laundry for the kibbutz, and you see a laundry machine right over here outside the kibbutz. I'm going to go inside in just a moment. Here's the laundry machine, all right? And this structure over here, which we'll talk about in a few moments, which is rather critical to the operation because the design was to build this operation entirely underground. And the laundry that we see was really a cover for a secret entrance to what was happening underground. Many of the people working on the kibbutz had no idea what was going on right beneath their feet. So that's part of maintaining the secrecy. The factory was built in 1945 and set into operation in early 1946. And in the next 2.5 years leading up to independence, produced well over 2 million bullets, which were the mainstay of the weapons available to us in the War of Independence. So the story now of Machon Ayalon. We're doing laundry. And the laundry is part of this very elaborate camouflage to avoid suspicion from the nearby British. Of course, the laundry is on the surface. And let's go inside the laundry and meet a real person in the laundry. A real person in the laundry. And her name is Sarah. And this is a real name, and this is a real story, and this is what the inside of the laundry looks like. By the way, the laundry was very interesting because part of the reason for the laundry, not only to cover the secret entrance to the bullet factory down below the surface, but was also because these machines, this was the laundry machine, quite a bit different from our General Electric or Maytag machines of the 20th century, made a huge amount of noise. And the bullet-making machinery down below also made a huge amount of noise. So part of the rationale of the laundry was to cover the sounds of the factory just below the surface. But they discovered that there's only a limited amount of laundry that they could do for kibbutz members. How dirty are their clothes going to get? So they opened up a storefront in nearby Rehovot and began to do laundry for the kibbutz, for the people of Rehovot as well. And the British are nearby. And the British say, wait, there's a kibbutz here doing laundry. Why do we have them do our laundry also? But they're only 200 yards away. Why do we have to go into the city of Rehovot? And so the British said, can we bring our laundry to you as well? And the British came to the kibbutz. This caused a big problem because we had to shut down the whole operation whenever the British brought their laundry or picked it up. But we also weren't going to cause any suspicion by saying, no, you can't come. In any event, one of the famous stories of the laundry is the story of Esther, who came in to do her laundry, and Sarah, who came in to do her laundry, and Esther, who was in on the secret. Sarah was not. She was a regular kibbutz member. They called the regular kibbutz members giraffes. The giraffe, because giraffe has their head way up, way up high, and has no idea what's going on beneath their feet. And Esther was not a giraffe. She was in on the secret, and you'll see the secret in just a moment. So Esther came in one day to do her laundry. Generally, Sarah was very careful about who they're going to let into this room. We'll see why in a moment. She had stepped out back for a second to hang some laundry on the line outside. And just at that moment, to her astonishment, I don't have a video of this, unfortunately, but this machine suddenly lifts itself off the ground and swings out, and all of a sudden reveals the secret opening. And Sarah turns around and sees her friends from the kibbutz coming up from underground. And the story is that she fainted away. At that moment, Sarah came back in, saw Esther. Esther came back in, so Sarah lying on the ground in a dead faint. Meanwhile, all of her kibbutz member friends were coming out from underneath the ground. She quickly threw a bucket of water over Sarah, revived her. Sarah understood what was going on. The next day, she had a new job on kibbutz because they felt that it was most important to keep the people that were involved in the secret operation down below would be the most likely ones to keep the secret, and therefore Sarah is now making bullets underground, and every day some 40 people from the kibbutz would gather in the laundry, in the room we just saw in the last slide. And once Esther looked around and saw they were all there, she would open the machine. They would scramble down the staircase to the floor some 25 feet below, and the machine would close, and it would be disguised. This is the view from the bottom, from the top looking down. It's fairly steep. It's interesting. 40 people would get down this staircase in 90 seconds. Back in the early days of Machon Ayalon, when I used to guide here before they had their own guiding staff, of which I am now a member, by the way, they used to allow us to bring groups down this staircase. We now have another way of going down, which is the way you and I are going to go down in a few moments. But I would not do it with more than 18 or 20 people, and it would take me 5 or 6 minutes at the shortest to move 20 people down below. So it's kind of amazing that 40 people would gather in this room, and when the laundry swung open to reveal the existence of the staircase, they would scoot down this ladder in 90 seconds. And then again, the machine would be closed, and none would be the wiser. There were other reasons for the choice of laundry. Let's go back to that for just a minute. I talked about the chimney over here. A great deal of thinking had to be employed as to more than simply finding a secret entrance for the staircase to the secret factory down below. One of them had to do with creating the image of a kibbutz, as we talked about a few moments ago, and actually having a real laundry. But there were all sorts of problems they had to be thought about and solved in order to make this successful, one of which was breathing, ventilation for people down below. Now, we're looking from a building at the other end of the factory. The factory underground is about the size of a tennis court. We're looking from one end of the tennis court across the courtyard to the other end of the tennis court-shaped factory. At this end, where we're standing now, was a bakery. At the other end, a laundry. And these two buildings were chosen with a great deal of thought because they took part in the secret ventilation system as well. Both the bakery and a laundry needed a chimney. The chimney was, of course, important for the hot water here, for the oven where we're standing right now, but also these chimneys extended down underground and provided a circulating system where fresh air could constantly be brought and stale air brought out from the factory underground. So let's go underground, and here we are. And this is a trip that I led with my family to Machon Ayalon, to the bullet factory, remember, about a year ago during Sukkot. And this is the assembly line where the bullets were manufactured. It took an entire assembly line. And people were down here for 8-hour shifts. It was very, very noisy. It was very not as stuffy because of the ventilating air system, but all of the operation of manufacturing the bullets, from producing the shell casing to the gunpowder to the bullet tip, were all done here on these machines down below. This is my grandson, Mihai. I'm looking with interest at some of the machines. You can see in the background the staircase from under the laundry, back over here where I'm pointing with my laser right now. Now, these machines were purchased back in 1938, but interestingly enough, and it's a fascinating story how they got to Israel. They were on a boat, and unfortunately, the ship's captain, it was a Polish boat, the machines came from Poland, and the ship's captain had gotten either suspicious or somebody was had tipped them off, and they knew the boat was coming in. We're not quite 100% certain, but the boat was due to dock at Haifa. Again, this is 1938. The captain of the ship had radioed ahead to the British, I have these crates in my hold that you might be interested. They're not farm machinery as they're labeled. And so the boat docks in Haifa, the British docks waiting to examine, presumably confiscate whatever is in these contraband crates, because the manufacture of arms, the possession of arms was totally illegal for the Jews of Palestine in those days. And the captain lowers the gangplank, the British greet him, they thank him for his diligence. Now we'd like to see where those crates are. And the captain said, what are you talking about? We unloaded them in Beirut yesterday. What had happened? It's rather an interesting story because back then, even in the 1930s, many of the people in Israel were working for the underground organizations. In this case, the woman who happened to be British headquarters and got the message from the captain of the ship was also working for the Hagana. Within 30 minutes, the Hagana had that message as well. Clearly, this was a top secret operation. And she had no idea what this was about, passed it on to Hagana headquarters. As the British prepared to confiscate the farm machinery when it landed in Haifa, the Hagana were preparing alternative plans. And indeed, the boat was greeted the day before it got to Haifa by Hagana agents dressed in British uniforms in Haifa, who thanked the captain for his diligence, took the agricultural equipment, mainly the bullet manufacturing equipment, off the ship in Beirut. And it actually stayed in Beirut. It was 7 more years before they were able to find a way of getting it into Israel and sneaking it in. But they got it in 1945. The factory dug and set up and operational by the beginning of 1946. And here we are now in the bullet factory down below. I think one of the most fascinating problems that have to be solved has to do with what's now on the screen. Because in the manufacture of anything, you need to be able to test your product. And so not only were they manufacturing the bullets, not only did they need a bathroom, not only did they need a place to have snacks when they didn't go out for lunch, but they needed to have a shooting range in the factory itself. Now, this is the size of a tennis court underground with the British 200 yards away. Clearly, you couldn't have a shooting range to test the bullets on the surface. And so people had to figure out how to do how to create a shooting range down below. And me, as a former math teacher, I made Aliyah, many of you know me. I made Aliyah from the States back in 1990. We're in Israel 30 years. My son Avi, who's assisting me with the video today, is in the picture, I believe. He was 17 at the time. And I came from being a math teacher, decided to become a tour guide. And when I guided this spot, as I am with you right now, I asked, especially if there are high school students in the crowd, so how many of you in your geometry class or your physics class or your trig class ever turned to your teacher or you turned to your parents and said, why do we need this? And the truth is, luckily, there were people here who had backgrounds in physics and trigonometry and understood that, yeah, it's possible to set up a shooting range about 15 feet long, even underground. And how do you do that? So I'm going to use my pointer here. Let's see if I can draw a circle. There we go. All right. And this circle, as you can see in the picture over here, was one of 2 such discs which were set up on a machine which rotated. And these discs were marked in angles. I'm not going to mark them quite as detailed as the ones in the picture, but this is 0 degrees, obviously. This is 90 degrees. Wow, not bad, right? This is 180. This is 270. 0 is once again 360. And of course, there are all sorts of sub-markings all the way along the circumference of the circle. And now let's go. If this circle is spinning at a known speed, and the 2 of them are lined up, and we have a circle here and one behind it, and they're spinning around at a known speed, and you know the distance in between them, when you shoot the gun, a bullet will go through, and it'll create a hole in the first disc, and it'll create a hole in the second disc behind it. Here we are. And since you know the distance between the discs, and you can see how far the rotation has taken place, they were able to calculate everything they needed to know about the bullet, its velocity, its trajectory, and they were able to follow standard manufacturing procedures of testing. Oh yeah, you need statistics too for this. You have to know I have to test, I don't know what it is, 4 out of every 10,000, and assume that if they're operating properly, the others are operating. And rather interestingly, one of the reasons they chose this particular location is there was a train right nearby. Indeed, that train caused a major problem a little bit later on. I don't know if I have time to do it on today's tour, but there was a train and a train station literally right off the grounds of the kibbutz, and they would time the shooting of the guns down below for the trains going by. And this way, the train would provide an additional noise. Think of trains back in the 1940s, additional noise to cover the sound of the bullets being tested down below. So let's move on now to the people who actually assembled the bullets. And here, these are actual picture people of the volunteers. They weren't volunteers. They were a scout group that had been drafted for this purpose back in 1945. Sofim Aleph from Pardes Chana, who were asked to kind of give up their youth to participate in this rather dangerous endeavor on behalf of the not yet to be born state of Israel. Now some of you might know from the bottom of bullets. I don't know how many of you have ever looked at a bullet, but the bullets, here's a bullet over here, right? Right? Standard bullets are always marked. And they had to think about this because, you have to mark the bullet. If the British were to find an empty shell casing without any markings on it, it would be a dead giveaway that there's something clandestine going on illegally, according to the British. And yet, and if you wrote in Hebrew, well, that would even be worse, because then they'd say, wow, the Jews are doing something illegally. They would have a clue to start looking and to hopefully not find, but they would at least understand that, wow, we're doing something that the British are not terribly happy about. And so they decided to put the letters A and E and 8 and a number, and I'll talk about that in a second, which hopefully would not arouse suspicion. A stood for Ayalon. Notice it's in English, not in Hebrew specifically, so should the British found it and look, they wouldn't be suspicious. E for Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, and the Sifra numeral for the year that it was created, either a 6, a 7, or an 8. 1948, of course, with independence, the bullet factory no longer had to be a secret and was moved to what today became Israel Military Industries. I had a chance with the staff of Machon Ayalon about a year ago to do a day's trip to the bullet factory today. First of all, there are pictures of the Machon Ayalon factory from the 1940s on the wall, because that's the beginning of the modern industry of Israel today. Today, they're using modern machines. It's all computerized. And whereas this factory produced between 12 and 15,000 bullets a day, the modern factory is producing a little bit over 1 million bullets a day. But it all began here, and these are the people that made it happen. Now, all of this is in preparation for our next stop on our trip. So we're going to get into our zoom over to Tel Aviv and the events of May 14th, 1948, the day of Israel independence. The building, which was decided as the site of Independence Hall, or Declaration of Independence, was this building in the heart of Tel Aviv on Rothschild Boulevard. And sitting in front is a statue of a man on a horse. And that man is a man whose name we're all familiar with. Anybody who's been to Israel, or those who have not yet been to Israel, his name is Meir Dizengoff. Meir Dizengoff was amongst the people that first built this new neighborhood of Tel Aviv, left the confined alleyways of Jaffa and started a new neighborhood on the sand dunes, about a half a mile to the north. The initial boulevard that they built with houses on both sides was called Rothschild Boulevard, in honor of the great benefactor, the Rothschild family. And the person who was elected head of the first committee of this neighborhood was a man named Meir Dizengoff, M-E-I-R Dizengoff. Meir Dizengoff is in the picture here, portrayed on a statue, because the place that was chosen for the Declaration of Independence ceremony was Meir Dizengoff's house. I'm writing Meir because Meir Dizengoff became a very important personality in the development of Tel Aviv. And indeed, when Tel Aviv incorporated as a city, Meir Dizengoff was elected as its first mayor. And so Meir Dizengoff became Meir Dizengoff. He died in the late 1930s, but while he was still alive as mayor, his house was visited by British dignitaries, by Albert Einstein, by Haim Nachman Bialik, by diplomats, by the British High Commissioners. And indeed was already, even at the time of Dizengoth's death, an important home in the growing city of Tel Aviv. He willed it to the city of Tel Aviv as a museum. And this is the spot that was chosen on that fateful day, May 1948, for the ceremony to declare Israel's independence. This is what it looks like today. Actually, it's currently closed. It's undergoing renovation, should be reopening soon. But this is Independence Hall, and it is in this building that the Declaration of Independence was read on May 15th, 1948. Now, in order to kind of get a background for what happened in this building, let's look at a couple of maps and just go quickly back over a little bit of history. So we have the map on the left, which is the map of the British Mandate in Palestine. And many of you may know that back in 1917, when Great Britain inherited Palestine from the Turkish Empire, this was the map of Palestine. Right? It's a rather interesting shape. This piece over here always intrigued me. Many of you may know that back in the early part of the 20th century, there was a pipeline bringing oil from Iraq to Haifa port and to be shipped out to the Mediterranean. And one of the reasons for this kind of strange shape in the country, which today we know as Jordan, is because this was a protective corridor around the Iraqi oil pipeline. In any event, in 1917, this is the Balfour Declaration. This is the map of Palestine. This is what was intended to be the home of the Jewish state. We were, of course, very happy about that. Great Britain in 1921 cut Palestine along the Jordan River Valley, which is this red line that I'm adding right now. Perhaps I should do it in a set different color. Let's see. I can bring up dark blue, maybe. How's that? Okay. Now it's the same. All right, here is the boundary, with the eastern bank of the Jordan River being created as a new country called Transjordan. Today we don't even say Transjordan anymore, we call it Jordan. And the left side, or the west bank, catch that term, of the Jordan River to now be the home of the future Jewish state. We are less than happy about it because at the time we're required to abandon a lot of different small farming villages which were set up along the valley on the other side, the Jordan Valley. Nevertheless, we uproot Jews, bring them into the West Bank over here, and for the next, this is 1921 when this takes place, masterminded by Winston Churchill, called the Churchill Plan. And now, if you look at the right side, this becomes what our hopes are to be the future home of the Jewish people. Those hopes become dashed. Great Britain now has what's called the mandate. The term mandate is really the League of Nations telling Great Britain, do it. And it was an empowerment for Great Britain to create the Jewish state. We all know that Great Britain began to drag its heels through the 20s. There were Arab riots in the 29, in 36, 37, 38, and Great Britain moved further and further away from keeping its commitment. Jordan was created as an independent country. Palestine remained as a British mandate in the 22% on the western side of the Jordan River. Finally, to skip a lot of history, in the aftermath of the Holocaust, Great Britain brings the problem to the United Nations in 1947. Sorry for my writing with a mouse here. Okay. And in 1947, the United Nations votes to partition Palestine, and this is the partition map of Palestine. We're very upset with this. One second. Dad, can you get it? We're very upset with this because look what it's done. There are terrible borders. It's basically based on demographics. Let's come back to that. Here we are on demographics. These being the Jewish population areas, and these being primarily Arab population areas. But wait a minute, that's not quite true because, now let's go back a second. Here we are. Because, well, more than 50% of what the United Nations so generally was giving us was the Negev. And the Negev had basically nobody. I mean, it had small kibbutzim. Ben-Gurion always believed that the future of Israel believed in our capacity to develop the Negev, but there was nobody here. And so our population was really in this narrow corridor along the Mediterranean. This is the city of Tzfat right over here. In this little spot, Tiberias, of course, I'm sorry, Tzfat is up over here. That's a mistake. The city of Tzfat is, let's put it in its proper place. Okay. City of Tzfat is over here in this little protrusion, see it? Okay, Tiberias is here, and this is to be the future home of the Jewish people. And it's a very sad moment. And you look over here, strategically, an incredibly difficult thing for us to control, particularly since the Arabs are hostile. Perhaps had they been happy about this, maybe it could have worked. But as we all know, once the UN voted on November 29th, 1947, by the way, a day which is extremely important in Jewish history. Every Jewish school child in this country knows November 29th. There are streets in major cities called Chavtet November Street, November 29th Street, and the UN votes. We were ecstatic, but Ben Gurion understands on that day that's really a day of tremendous happiness, but tremendous sadness, because as we prepare to declare independence, our local population, as well as our neighbors in Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq down here, Lebanon up here, are preparing a very different type of declaration, the declaration of war. And those bullets, which were being manufactured back at Machon Ayalon, will now be very, very useful. And indeed, war breaks out the very day after the UN vote, and we're already finding ourselves defending the roads and the Jewish settlements all over the country. The British are anxious to get out in May, so they're not doing very much to help us. And that brings us back to Independence Hall. And now we have just entered to the inside of the chamber, where on that day, on May 1948, the Jewish Council assembled, and David Ben Gurion read the Declaration of Independence. So if we look, first of all, we understand one of the reasons this particular building and this particular room were chosen. If you look up here, where did I lose my pointer? There we go. Okay, there we are. It was a shelter on the bottom floor of the building. So there were very narrow windows, and it was very, very considered safe room. It was a protected room, and it was the ideal room, the leadership of the Jewish people all together for this fateful moment. And think what we're doing. I mean, we're really bringing all the leaders of the Jewish people together. I think this is one of the funny stories about the moment of independence. This is a copy of the invitation that was sent to the few hundred people that were invited to join with the leadership of the Provisional Council. You can see the date, May 13th, 1948. All right. We are happy to, we are honored to send to you this invitation to the Moshav, the meeting of the Declaration of Independence, which will take place on May 14th, Erev Shabbat, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Even though the British were not leaving until the next day, they did not want to have a ceremony, obviously, on Shabbat. And so the decision was to do the ceremony on the eve of Shabbat, the afternoon of the 4th, at 4 in the afternoon. And this is the line I love. Anu mivakshin, we request lishmor besod et tochen hazmanazo. We ask you to please keep the secret of this invitation and the moed kinus hamoitza, and of the time of the meeting. Now think about it. We are assembling all of the leadership of Israel in one room with the British leaving. We don't have an air force. We know that the Egyptians would be more than happy to know where this is taking place in order to be able to bomb the meeting and destroy much of our leadership. The last thing we needed was to have this information in the public. And so the request was to please keep this a secret. Do you know Jews to keep secrets? And so, remember, this is sent only to the people that are invited to be inside. This is what it looked like outside at 3 in the afternoon on Friday, May 4th. There were thousands of people gathered. International stations were tuned in because they knew it was taking place, and anything but a secret. In any event, Baruch Hashem, thank God, the British was still here. The Arabs did not respond to the potential, and the ceremony was able to take place without any hitch and went off without a hitch. And so now this takes us back into the room as it looked not today, but 72 years ago on the day of independence with David Ben Gurion stand to read the Declaration of Independence. And one of the most dramatic moments that I find when we visit this room, and let's see how well I've mastered the technology, is this moment of David Ben Gurion saying, let's see if I can get to it. I have to find my, here it is. Let's see, I want to get this out of the way. Top thing, here we are. Okay. So let's listen to the moment of the Declaration of Independence. Not going to play the whole thing. So let's see if we can get to hear the sound. And I want to go to about over here.
להקמת השלטונות הנבחרים והסדירים של המדינה בהתאם לחוקה שתיקבע על ידי האספה המכוננת הנבחרת לא יאוחר מ-1 באוקטובר. תהא פתוחה לעלייה יהודית ולקיבוץ גלויות. תשקוד על פיתוח הארץ לטובת כל תושביה. תהא מושתתת על יסודות החירות, הצדק והשלום לאור חזונם של נביאי ישראל. תקיים שוויון זכויות חברתי ומדינמות לכל אזרחיה בלי הבדל דת וגזע ומין. תבטיח חופש דת, מצפון, חינוך.
So that is David Ben-Gurion reading the Declaration of Independence. We heard a different section of it, which I think is extremely important to hear because it kind of highlights and underscores some of the critical basis of the state of Israel, the most important moment. Accordingly, we, the members of the People's Council, representatives of the Jewish community, are here assembled on the day of the termination of the British mandate over Eretz Israel. And by virtue of our historic, natural historic right, and on the strength of the UN General Assembly, hereby declare the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel to be known as the State of Israel. Applause. And Rabbi Schiffman, who was sitting immediately to Ben-Gurion's left, stood up and recited for the first time in the modern state of Israel, Shechiyanu. But as you know, what it meant was that, as Ben-Gurion had feared, the battles which had been going on already since November were only going to get worse. And now with the British out of the way, we're totally on our own to attempt to fight off the invasion of the British. And our last stop on our way to Jerusalem is this critical piece now that you see in the map on the left, the Partition Plan. And by the way, as you notice, one of the real disappointments in the Partition Plan was that Jerusalem, this white block over here, according to the United Nations, was going to be an international city in the middle of the Arab zone with tremendous, tremendous pain in our hearts. We accepted this. Again, if the Arabs made this work, and we were ready to say, okay, we'll work along with you. As you well know, the Arabs were not about ready to make this work, and we were attacked, and Jerusalem was isolated and under siege already from December 1947 right through the beginning of the War of Independence. And now some of the most critical battles are going to take place on our journey up to Jerusalem along that road, which is the blue arrow. I'm going to come back to this map a little while later. I put this one up over here just to show you how the War of Independence changed the map. All of these things have implications for today. The major change, as far as we're concerned, was this section over here. You can see there are major changes in the Galilee as a result of the War of Independence. And of course, the area known as Gaza, this area here. But I want to focus on the road to Jerusalem as we now head over into our vehicles to Jerusalem. And the road to Jerusalem back in 1948 was this narrow corridor winding through the mountains in a section known as Shar Hagai, the gateway to the valley. It's a, as you see, narrow, winding road. This is a picture probably back from the 1950s with an old bus lumbering up the road. Just imagine the difficulties that we've confronted in December of 47, in January, February, and March, with our enemy poised on the mountains above us on both sides, and us trying to push through supplies and equipment to keep Jerusalem alive under the Arab siege. We used to armor plate the trucks. Any of you who've been to Israel, I'm sure, are familiar with this vision of these trucks along the road. It doesn't quite look like this anymore because the road is now a 6-lane highway, and in sections it's going to 8 lanes. But back then it was a 2-lane road that we just saw, and we see a picture here of some Arabs triumphant over these vehicles which were bringing supplies to Jerusalem. These are simply metallic boxes around the backs of the trucks to give the people some protection, or in this case, to give the Hagana some shooting holes to try to bring convoys of vehicles up to Jerusalem. And indeed, for many of the months, up until the War of Independence, that was what it looked like. Today, if we were to drive on that road today, this is what we're going to see. Those vehicles will be assembled in a number of different spots. And today, being Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, people have gone out yesterday, Memorial Day, and we still lay wreaths and put flags on these vehicles to remember the sacrifice that we had to pay in order to make Jerusalem ours back in 1948. The road today, as I said, is a super highway, very long. Okay, so I would like to share with you just one story about one of the extremely important operations in the War of Independence along that road, an operation which was called Operation Nachshon. We'll come back to that name in a little while. Wait a minute, there we are. An operation called Operation Nachshon. Let's move down. Here we go. Okay. Operation Nachshon in early April of 1948. Now, remember, at this point, Jerusalem is totally isolated and under siege. It's interesting. People were being asked to subsist on bare amount of food. Water was so rare that there were all sorts of posters out as to how to use your allotted 10 liters, to first use it for drinking and for preparing vegetables and food, and then recycling that water and using it to clean the house, and then recycling that water and accumulating it and using it to flush the toilet. But that's how the hard situation was in Jerusalem. And the critical part of the road was the part of the road that's in the map that shows up on this page over here. It's in Hebrew. I'm assuming many of you can handle the Hebrew. Here's Jerusalem up on down on the right. Here is the road to Beit Shemesh, which many of us are familiar with. Okay. And here is that section of road known as Shar Hagai, connecting the valley into the hills up to Jerusalem, a section we're all familiar with. Here is the monastery of Latrun. I'll write it in English. Now, many of you may know that Latrun actually remained, there should be a U in there, that is a U, that Latrun remained in Jordanian hands up until 1967. And so the road that we used to take prior to 1967, and I remember this firsthand, I was in Israel as a teenager in 1963, was a long bypass around from Ramla out down here to an intersection called Shalmet Nachshon. We'll talk about that. And then connecting at Somet Shimshon and back up to the road to Jerusalem at Shar Hagai. Okay, so I want to talk about this particular battle. It's a very famous battle and a critical battle. It's a battle which was led by a young Palmach commander in his 20s, a 23 or 24-year-old named Yitzhak Rabin. And we placed on Yitzhak Rabin's shoulders the task of opening up the road at the Castel, which was a height overlooking, kind of like the picture I showed you earlier, and blocking all the traffic coming into Jerusalem. If we couldn't get by the Castel, Phyllis, 10 minutes. If we couldn't get the Castel, then we were not able to push supplies into Jerusalem. And so Rabin was given the task of opening up the Castel. And in a famous battle that lasted a number of days, which literally went both ways over the course of the battle, we succeeded. Give me 1 second. Okay. The battle changed hands a number of times. It was a rather miraculous ending that we were actually in full retreat from the hill, having tried for 3 days to hold on to it. Managed to push through a number of convoys in the meantime, but we just couldn't hold on, and we were in retreat. It was at that point that the officers of the Israeli army established the principle, which has been with us since, of officers covering the retreat of the enlisted men. And miraculously, turns out that in the in the battle, one of the Arab commanders, al-Husseini, was killed. The Arabs came across his body. They suddenly, on the verge of victory, in grief, broke off the battle. The Palmach, seeing that the Arabs were retreating on the other side, came back up, retook the hill, and it remained in our hands till today. As I said, it's at the Castel, which is opposite Mivaseret Zion. So if you drive to Jerusalem and you're past the Mivaseret Mall, you look up to the right. If you're going up towards Jerusalem, that's the Castel. It's a national park. You can visit the battle site. And I love the name Nachshon because the Hagana in this battle chose the name Nachshon, undoubtedly because they remembered the name from the Tanakh, the story of Nachshon ben Amitabh, who forged into the Red Sea, opened up the Red Sea, and brought about the great miracle of Jung-Soo, the splitting of the Red Sea. Dad.
I'm sorry.
Okay. I want to show you this on a map. So let's move over to the map just for 1 second. Remember the partition plan. So this was that critical corridor to Jerusalem. One of the big problems for us in the partition plan, it was a bitter pill to swallow, was that Jerusalem, this white blot on the left-hand map, was an international city supposedly under UN control. We're not happy about it, but we didn't have much of a choice, and we accepted it. And nevertheless, the Arabs chose to put Jerusalem under siege, and now the decision was made then to open up Jerusalem. And today, by the end of 1949, actually March 49, when the Armistice went into effect, so we've opened up a corridor into Jerusalem, and the map has changed dramatically from what was proposed by the United Nations to what it now looks like for the next 19 years, from 1949, actually from 48 already, although the Armistice is 1949, until the Six-Day War of 1967. Let me show this to you on a Jerusalem map as well. Here we are, map of Jerusalem. What did this look like for those 19 years? Okay, so this is that corridor leading into Jerusalem. You can follow what today is called the Green Line. This is north of Jerusalem. This is the area today, which is the neighborhood of Ramot. Off to the north. The border swings around through the city of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a divided city, and then heads back out. And over here on the south, well, it's much bigger than it actually is. Let's see if I can erase that. Here we go. Okay, let's get back to my red again. All right, up here today is the neighborhood of Gilo, overlooking Jerusalem on the south. But you can see how Jerusalem was literally surrounded by Jordanian territory on all three sides during those 19 years. With the old city being completely in Jordanian hands. And some of you may not know this, but Mount Scopus, as an enclave held by Israel in Jordanian territory. We had to abandon the Hebrew University, which was built here in 1929, and the Hadassah Hospital, which followed it. We were allowed every 2 weeks to send a convoy through under UN supervision. But for the next 19 years in Jerusalem, Mount Scopus was totally cut off for civilian use. A new Hadassah Hospital was built out at Ein Karem. A new Hebrew University was built over here on Givat Ram. And only in 1967 was Mount Scopus liberated and this connection reunited. And now we have both campuses existing. I want to introduce you to a wonderful, wonderful special woman who's become a very dear friend of ours named Tzipora Porath, Tzipi Porath. Tzipi was born in the United States, grew up in Manhattan, actually. We've discovered as we got to know each other, we met about 5 years ago, that Tzipi grew up on 84th and Broadway, for those of you who know New York City. I grew up on 85th and West End Avenue. So although we didn't know each other, Tzipi is well over 20 years older than I am. But we grew up in the same neighborhood. Tzipi was a graduate of Brooklyn College. And in the fall of 1947, was invited, actually was given a scholarship to study 1 semester at Hebrew University. Fall of 1947. What happens in the fall of 1947? The UN Partition Plan. We talked about it a little bit earlier on November 29th, 1947. And at that point, when hostilities suddenly now break out, with the British being even less of a hand of keeping the peace, and the bullets from Machon Ayalon now being really put into use, most of Tzipi's friends at Hebrew University decided to go back to the United States, go back to their homes. Tzipi decided to remain in Israel, in Jerusalem, and within a number of weeks had volunteered for the Hagana. She describes, both in her book as well as when she talks to our groups, here's Tzipi talking to one of the groups that I brought to hear her story of her swearing-in ceremony at the Hagana, being taken down to a basement and giving a Bible in one hand and a Tanakh in one hand and a gun in the other, and swearing her allegiance to the Hagana to defend the state of Israel. What's remarkable is that Tzipi was a journalist major, and she documented her entire story in Israel in 47, 48 in letters that she sent back to her parents and her sister back in the United States. Some 40 years later, when she went back for her mother's Shiva, she discovered that her mother had preserved all of her letters, and she put them together into a wonderful book called Letters from Jerusalem, 47, 48. It's over here on the podium in front of Tzipi. I didn't do that, did I? Okay, here we are back at Tzipi. And I've invited Tzipi often when she speaks to read from her book because she just speaks so eloquently. And what I'd like to do as we approach the end of our Tiyul today is do the same and invite Tzipi. I'm going to ask her here. This is actually an interview with Avi, who's helping me with technical today, my son Avi. Tzipi talking about her experience in the War of Independence. So remember, Tzipi now is well into her 90s. She just had her 96th birthday, an eyewitness participant to Israeli independence and fought in the battles of Jerusalem. Tzipi?
It's a personal eyewitness account of happening day by day, recorded by an ardent Zionist from the United States who comes and stays to take part in the struggle for the birth of the state during the War of Independence.
Wow.
Amazing. We love you, Tzipi.
Will you read those two paragraphs for everybody? Everyone, listen
This one?
carefully, and then
this one?
write the book.
Here.
Oh, okay. This one,
People Today.
Okay.
Listen carefully.
People today, especially young people, sometimes forget that only a few short decades ago, there was no Jewish state, no Israel. It didn't exist. They take it for granted. But for those of us who are privileged to take part in its birth, Israel will always have a special aura. It was a turning point, not only in the history of our people, but in our personal lives as well. What I discovered in my first year here is still true. I belong here. This is my home. I'm still a starry-eyed optimist who believes that whatever we do here as individuals is meaningful. We count just by being here, helping to bring closer the dream of a better Israel. My commitment to this country is still a source of personal satisfaction. Then, as now, I know why I'm here.
All right, so that is my friend Tzipi Porath. I would like to end, and I hope I can pull this off technically, with having visited Machon Ayalon and then taking us to Independence Hall and then along the road to Jerusalem with a very special moment. Today is the celebration of the 72nd anniversary of Israel's independence. Since my being in Israel, I must tell you that I think my favorite day every year is Independence Day. I love the ceremonies that take place. Our entire community gathers in our town's, like a town plaza, and we so it's like an hour and a half ceremony. The kids perform their flags, and it's just an amazing, amazing experience. This year we're going to miss it, obviously, that our celebration for Yom Ha'atzmaut is going to be virtual, as is this Tiyul today. It's going to be virtual. But what I'd like to share with you is a recording of the climax moment of our ceremony here. I live in the town of Efrat. You'll see probably about half the town assembled, 5,000 to 6,000 people, for the Yom Ha'atzmaut ceremonies of 1970, of 2007, 2018, the 70th year of Israel. And let's see now if I can bring that Yom Ha'atzmaut in Israel. I mean, I'm kind of choked saying this because we miss it this year. It would have been wonderful to be out with thousands and thousands of people. And what you saw was duplicated in towns and cities all over the country as people celebrate the modern miracle of the state of Israel, now in our 72nd year. I hope you've enjoyed some of the journey on the path to independence, the miracle of the state of Israel, the reason why many of us in the religious community say Hallel today, because it's a modern miracle of Israel reborn. And we look for the opportunity to be able to be guiding with you, not virtually, but here as we walk together through the up and down the paths and the byways of this beautiful, beautiful land, Artseinu HaKadosha, where according to the words of the Hatikva, we are Liot Am Chofshi B'Artseinu. We are now a free people in our own hand, in our own land. May we ultimately see a world at peace, and with many, many guests to Israel, and many of you following Tzipi's inspiration, and even realizing that this is the home of the Jewish people. We have this golden opportunity, which we only dreamed about for 2,000 years. And Yom Ha'atzmaut is the celebration of that 2,000-year dream now being a reality. It's been my pleasure being with you today. Chag Yom Ha'atzmaut Sameach L'kulam.